It was just another quiet morning in the small town of Oakridge, a place where everyone knew everyone else. The sun rose lazily behind the distant mountains, casting long shadows over the streets where the early birds were already up, sipping coffee and walking their dogs. The hum of everyday life filled the air, and as the world outside slowly came to life, so did Olivia Carter, though hers was a life that very few could understand. Olivia had learned to keep her secret well. By day, she was just like any other woman in Oakridge, a hard-working, determined woman trying to make a life for herself. Her job at the local cafe, where she served coffee and sandwiches to the regulars, was nothing special in itself, but it was more than enough for the people around her. They saw her as a quiet woman, intelligent, with a subtle grace, always polite and respectful. She was just another face in a crowd of similar lives. The residents of Oakridge were content to see her as someone ordinary, someone they could relate to. But the truth was, Olivia was far from ordinary. At the age of 32, Olivia Carter had lived a life most people would find impossible to imagine. She had joined the CIA straight out of college, a decision that would forever change the course of her existence. What she had told only a few trusted people was that she had done it because she wanted to protect people. She had seen too many lives ruined by crime, too many families torn apart, too many injustices go unpunished. She had wanted to make a difference. But that was a part of her life she kept hidden. No one in Oakridge knew about her role as an undercover CIA agent. To them, she was just a local woman, no different from anyone else. She wore no flashy clothes, drove a simple car, and didn't draw attention to herself. That was her strength. The ability to blend in was key to her work. On this particular day, she woke up early, as she always did, her body still adjusting to the aftereffects of another covert mission she had just completed. The night before, she had infiltrated a criminal ring involved in smuggling weapons across state lines, and her mission had ended with the arrest of 2 high-level criminals. It had been a success, but it had taken its toll. She had barely slept, the weight of what she had done still fresh in her mind. As she made her way to the cafe, she noticed the usual bustle of morning activity around her. The scent of fresh coffee from the roasters down the street filled the air. She loved mornings, the world still quiet and waiting, the promise of a fresh start. But there was something different in the air today. It was as though the calm was only an illusion. The energy felt thick, like something was about to break. She couldn't shake the feeling, though she tried to push it aside, telling herself it was just the stress of the past few days catching up with her. Keeping her eyes and ears open, trying to gain intel. But this felt different. She looked around the quiet town again, the same streets she had walked down 1,000 times, the same familiar faces. It all seemed so normal, so predictable. But it wasn't. Her phone buzzed again. Urgent. Meet at the safe house in an hour. Full briefing. Olivia took a deep breath. There was no time to waste. She needed to be ready. She was no longer just a civilian. She was an agent, a woman on a mission. And Oakridge, this small town she had once seen as a peaceful escape, was about to become the stage for something far darker than anyone could have imagined. As she made her way toward the safe house, her mind raced. What had changed? Why was she being pulled into something bigger than herself? The questions swirled, but there was no time to find the answers. She could feel the storm on the horizon, and it was coming for her. For the town. For everyone. As she turned the corner and saw the safe house in the distance, a chill ran down her spine. Something was coming. Something big. And it was going to change everything. The safe house was tucked away in a quiet corner of Oakridge, hidden from prying eyes behind a row of trees and an unassuming garden fence. A place where secrets could be kept. Olivia had been here before, twice, to be exact. Each time had been a quick in and out, a necessary stop for briefings, intel updates, or emergency cover-ups. She didn't like it here. The stillness of the house, the constant reminder that the work she did wasn't normal, was something she tried to avoid. But today was different. She felt an odd heaviness in the air as she approached the house. Olivia arrived just as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the street. The town felt quieter than usual, and for the first time, she noticed how still it was. Even the birds seemed to have stopped chirping. It was the kind of stillness that felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. She shook the feeling off, telling herself she was just jumpy from the last few days' missions, but the gnawing sense of foreboding wouldn't let her go. The agent who greeted her at the door was someone she'd never met before. Tall, with sharp eyes and a professional air about him, he quickly ushered her inside without saying much. Olivia felt a spark of irritation. She wasn't one to appreciate secrecy, especially not in her line of work. She was used to direct, open communication, but the agent didn't seem keen on small talk. Once inside, Olivia's contact, an older CIA officer named Agent Lawson, was already waiting in the dimly lit room. His hands were steepled in front of him as he looked over some papers spread out on the table. Lawson was the kind of guy who never let his emotions show, and in his world, that was essential. "Olivia," he said, his voice low and steady. "I need you to listen carefully." Olivia raised an eyebrow. The urgency in his tone told her this wasn't going to be one of those standard briefings. "What's going on?" she asked. Lawson leaned forward, his expression more serious than she had ever seen. "We've received intel that a rogue cop here in Oakridge is involved in a smuggling operation. Weapons, drugs, probably both. He's connected to a larger criminal syndicate, and we need you to infiltrate." She took a step back, the pieces starting to fall into place. The cop they were talking about wasn't just any officer, it was Officer Trent, the one she'd been hearing whispers about for months. His name had come up in conversations with a few people in town, mostly in hushed tones. Known for his brash demeanor and apparent disregard for law, Trent had become a figure of suspicion in the community. He was tough on the outside, but Olivia knew better than anyone that some of the most dangerous people wore the uniforms that were supposed to protect society. "I've heard of him," Olivia said, her voice a little more guarded. "What do you need me to do?" "We need you to get close to him," Lawson continued, flipping through the papers in front of him. "Find out everything you can, how deep his connections run, who's backing him, and, most importantly, what he's planning. But be careful, Olivia. This is going to be risky. Trent's no fool. He's been on our radar for a while." Olivia nodded. She had been in dangerous situations before, but something about this felt different. Officer Trent wasn't just a small-town cop, he was a part of something larger. Something darker. And she had to be careful not to draw attention to herself. After a brief pause, Lawson gave her the final piece of the puzzle. "You'll be going in as a civilian. We've arranged for you to get a job at the Oakridge Police Department. A small undercover operation to get close to Trent and gain his trust. If we're going to bring him down, we need everything, every detail." Olivia's stomach twisted. The thought of getting that close to someone like Trent made her uneasy. He was unpredictable, volatile. She had faced much more dangerous men in her career, but there was something about him that unsettled her. It wasn't just the rumors about his violent tendencies, it was the cold, calculating nature he had when dealing with people. He was a man who didn't hesitate to take matters into his own hands. And she would have to play right into that. "I'll do it," she said, her voice unwavering. "But I want to know everything about him. I need a full profile, his habits, his weaknesses, his patterns." Lawson slid a folder across the table. "Everything we know is in here. But remember, this has to be quick. We don't know how long Trent will stay under our radar. Move in, get the intel, and get out." "And Olivia," Lawson paused, his gaze sharpening. If you feel like things are going south, pull out. Don't take any unnecessary risks. Olivia felt a twinge of unease but kept her face neutral. Understood. After a quick exchange of final details, Olivia left the safe house with a sense of purpose. She didn't like the idea of being that close to someone like Trent, but her job was clear. She had to find out what he was involved in, no matter the cost. The next few days were a whirlwind. Olivia moved fast. She went to the local police department, pretending to be a new recruit looking for a job. She wasn't a rookie, her cover story was solid enough to get her in the door. The department was understaffed, and with the rising tensions in the town, they were eager to bring in new blood. Within a day, she was working alongside Officer Trent, observing his every move. At first, it was just mundane tasks. Helping with paperwork, answering phones, riding along on patrol. But Olivia's instincts told her that something was off. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but there was a darkness that surrounded Trent. It wasn't just the way he barked orders at his fellow officers or the way his eyes would narrow when he looked at certain people, it was the way he seemed to take pleasure in the small, oppressive actions he took. The way he humiliated people during routine traffic stops or mocked those who didn't have the right answers. Olivia knew that in order to get close to him, she had to be patient. She observed. She let him believe she was just another eager rookie. But deep down, she knew she was playing a dangerous game. As the days went by, she started picking up on little details, strange phone calls Trent received late at night, his furtive glances when certain names were mentioned in conversation, and the way he always seemed to know when a bust was about to go down, even when he wasn't officially involved. It wasn't long before Olivia discovered the truth. Officer Trent was heavily involved in a criminal syndicate that was smuggling illegal firearms across state lines. And as her investigation dug deeper, she realized something even more chilling: he wasn't just a rogue cop. Trent was connected to a vast network of corruption that reached far beyond Oakridge. And if she wasn't careful, she'd become part of that web. It all came to a head one evening. Olivia and Trent were working a routine traffic stop when the situation suddenly escalated. Olivia was in the passenger seat, watching as Trent pulled over a car for a minor infraction. He approached the vehicle, his hand resting on the gun holstered at his waist. Olivia's heart raced. This was the moment she had been waiting for. But what happened next took her completely by surprise. Officer Trent's voice dropped low as he asked the driver to step out of the car. His words were laced with venom, and Olivia saw a shift in his demeanor, a sudden aggression she hadn't seen before. As he began to approach the driver, something inside Olivia clicked. She knew something was about to happen, something that would change everything. Without warning, Trent shoved the driver to the ground, his anger flaring up. Olivia's instincts kicked in. She reached for her radio, but Trent's sharp eyes caught her hand mid-motion. He turned to her, a dark smile on his face, the air thick with tension. "What's the matter, rookie?" he sneered. "You think you can stop me?" Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She had just been forced into a decision she hadn't anticipated. Was she about to confront him? Would this be the moment everything unraveled? She hesitated for a moment, just long enough for Trent to see the uncertainty in her eyes. Then, before she could make a choice, he struck. The night had taken a dark turn, and Olivia found herself on a collision course with a man who had no idea what awaited him next. The days following that tense encounter were filled with an uneasy silence. Olivia had learned that Trent wasn't someone to cross, especially not when he was backed by forces far greater than anyone in Oakridge realized. The tension from that night, when she'd frozen for that brief moment, unsure of what to do, lingered in the air. The memory of Trent's sneer haunted her, but it was his warning that cut deeper. "You think you can stop me?" The words weren't just a challenge, they were a subtle promise that if she was going to play this game, she would have to be prepared to deal with the consequences. And in this world, the consequences weren't just career-ending mistakes, they were life-ending ones. Olivia didn't regret her hesitation. Not exactly. She had to be smart. Rushing into confrontation would have exposed her cover in an instant. She knew better than anyone that getting too close to someone like Trent, especially now that she knew how deep his involvement went, was dangerous. But even as she mentally justified her actions, she knew she had crossed an invisible line. Her mission was no longer just about uncovering the truth about a corrupt cop. It was about survival. Her own survival, and the survival of everyone she cared about. As the days stretched into a week, Olivia's suspicion of Trent deepened. She had observed him carefully since that moment on the traffic stop. He was far more methodical than she had first imagined. Every move he made seemed calculated, as if he knew exactly how to hide in plain sight. He had a way of charming his colleagues and intimidating anyone who might stand in his way. Olivia noticed the way people in the department looked at him. There was a respect, a fear, really, that followed him wherever he went. Officers deferred to him, and even the chief turned a blind eye when Trent overstepped boundaries. It was as though the system itself had been bent to his will, and no one was brave enough to challenge him. But Olivia had something that Trent didn't, the truth. And she wasn't going to back down. It was a few days after that traffic stop when she got her first real break. She had been shadowing Trent on his patrols, always keeping a low profile, and had begun to notice strange behavior. He would take a detour on his routes, often stopping at locations that didn't make sense for a cop on duty. Sometimes, he would spend hours in certain spots, meeting with shady characters who looked out of place in a small town like Oakridge. She began to gather intel, documenting everything she could. She was careful to remain unnoticed, slipping through the shadows as she gathered the pieces that would eventually bring Trent down. One afternoon, Olivia followed Trent to a secluded warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a nondescript building, hidden by overgrown trees and bushes that had long since been abandoned by the public. Trent parked his police car in front, a move that surprised Olivia. If he was meeting with criminals, why was he using his official vehicle? Was he so confident that he didn't care about being caught? Or did he think he was untouchable? Olivia's instincts told her that this was it, the moment she had been waiting for. She parked a few blocks away, keeping her distance but staying close enough to watch the building. For nearly an hour, Trent remained inside, while Olivia observed the comings and goings of several vehicles. They were unmarked cars, probably stolen or rented. She noticed a few men exiting the building, all dressed in plain clothes but carrying duffel bags. The kinds of bags that screamed contraband. Her heart raced as she quickly scribbled down their license plate numbers. The connection was becoming clearer. Trent was running an underground operation, and this warehouse was a key part of it. Olivia knew she needed backup. This was bigger than she had anticipated. But she also knew that if she moved too quickly, if she called for support too soon, Trent would slip through her fingers. His ability to hide in plain sight was his greatest asset. She couldn't let him get away again. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that this wasn't just about bringing him to justice anymore. The stakes had grown. Olivia had become a part of something much larger, something that she couldn't fully grasp yet but could feel creeping in, just out of sight, like a shadow waiting to pounce. Her next move would determine everything. That night, after a long shift spent gathering more intel, Olivia found herself back at the cafe, trying to settle her thoughts. Her mind raced with the information she had uncovered, the dangerous web that Trent had woven around Oakridge. He had the power to control the town, to manipulate the system. And if she wasn't careful, she could easily find herself tangled in it. But she couldn't walk away. Not now. Not when she was so close to uncovering everything. As she sat alone at the counter, sipping her coffee, Olivia noticed a man walk in. He was tall, wearing a worn leather jacket, his eyes scanning the room. He didn't look like a regular. Something about him caught her attention. He was too calm for this town, too confident. She studied him for a moment, then glanced back down at her cup, hoping he hadn't noticed her staring. But then he spoke. "Coffee, black," the man said, his voice deep and smooth. Olivia turned toward him, instinctively, as her eyes met his. There was something about the way he looked at her, a kind of knowing, almost like he could see through her. For a split second, she felt exposed. She forced a polite smile and nodded. "Coming right up." As she turned to prepare the coffee, her mind raced. That man. She recognized him. He was one of the men she had seen leaving the warehouse. The realization hit her hard. This wasn't just a coincidence. Whoever he wasn't just a bystander in this operation, he was a part of it. She quickly served him the coffee, trying to keep her composure, but her mind was already in overdrive. This man was connected to Trent, and now, he was in her town, in her cafe. What did that mean? Was he watching her? Olivia didn't have time to figure it out right now. She had to act fast. The man took his coffee, paid in cash without a word, and left the cafe, his footsteps echoing in the quiet night. Olivia watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest. She knew she couldn't let him slip away. She had to find out what he knew. But how? As the door closed behind him, Olivia's phone buzzed with an incoming message from Agent Lawson. The message was short but heavy with urgency. "Trent's on to you. Be careful. We've got your back, but move quickly." Her stomach churned. The walls were closing in. Olivia knew this was it. The moment she had been waiting for, the moment she had feared. Trent was no longer just a corrupt cop. He was a threat to everything she had worked for, and now, he knew she was getting too close. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about survival. As she looked out the window, she saw the man walk past the cafe, heading toward a black SUV parked down the street. Olivia's instincts screamed at her. If she didn't act now, she might lose her chance. But there was no room for mistakes. No second chances. She had to get to the truth, and fast. Olivia grabbed her jacket, her mind set on one thing: she would follow him. No matter the cost. She had no idea what awaited her on the other side of this choice, but she knew she couldn't turn back now. The moment of reckoning had arrived, and it would change everything. Olivia's pulse was racing as she watched the man slip into the black SUV. She knew that if she didn't follow him now, she might never have another chance. The dark streets of Oakridge suddenly felt smaller, more oppressive. The town, which had once seemed so quiet and easy to navigate, now felt like a labyrinth. She was no longer just a bystander. She was in the thick of it, part of something far bigger and more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. As she slid into her car, she kept her eyes on the SUV, trying to remain undetected. She knew the risks, but there was no turning back. Trent was onto her. The warning from Agent Lawson still echoed in her mind. "Trent's on to you. Be careful." But she couldn't back out now. She had come too far, uncovered too much. If she didn't act, the consequences would be even more dire than she could anticipate. Her hands tightened on the steering wheel as she followed the SUV, keeping a careful distance, her heart pounding with each turn the vehicle made. The streets of Oakridge, once familiar and comforting, felt foreign to her now. She barely noticed the time passing, her entire focus locked on the road ahead. The SUV took a winding route that led her farther away from the town center. She was getting into uncharted territory, places she had never driven before. The quiet outskirts of Oakridge gave way to dense woods and narrow, unlit roads. The night felt like it was swallowing her whole. For a brief moment, she questioned her decision. Should she pull back? Was this really the right choice? But just as quickly as the doubt came, it disappeared. She couldn't stop now. Not when she was so close to uncovering everything. She had a job to do. She had a mission to complete. And more than that, she had a responsibility, not just to herself, but to the people who depended on her, even if they didn't know it. The SUV slowed as it neared a dilapidated farmhouse. It was a place Olivia had never seen before. A once proud house now stood in decay, windows boarded up, the roof sagging. But there was something about it, something that made Olivia's instinct scream that this was it. This was where everything was leading. This was where the answers lay. She parked her car a few hundred yards away, far enough that she wouldn't be seen but close enough to keep her eyes on the farmhouse. The SUV stopped in front of the house, and the man who had been inside the cafe stepped out. He didn't hurry. There was no urgency in his movements. He knew he wasn't being followed, or so he thought. Olivia watched as he walked up the overgrown path and disappeared inside the house. The tension in her chest only grew. She had to get closer. She couldn't just sit back and wait for someone else to swoop in. This was her moment, her responsibility. There was too much at stake. Slipping out of her car, Olivia crept toward the farmhouse, her steps as silent as possible. The darkness around her seemed to press in, but her focus was absolute. Every sound, every movement, felt amplified in the still night. She could hear the distant rustling of leaves and the creaking of branches in the wind, but everything else was deathly quiet. The farmhouse loomed in front of her, and she hesitated only for a second before moving forward. The closer she got to the house, the more she realized that this wasn't just a hidden base of operations for Trent and his associates, it was something worse. She could feel it in her gut. There was an unmistakable sense of foreboding. It wasn't just the isolation of the location, the starkness of the decaying building. It was the sense that something much darker was unfolding inside. Olivia had spent years in the field, and she could read the signs of danger like few others. This wasn't just about corruption or illegal dealings anymore. This was something far more sinister. She had stepped into the eye of a storm, and she had no idea just how bad it was going to get. She crept closer to the house, pressing her back against the wall as she neared a window. The sound of muffled voices came from inside. Olivia strained to hear, her breath shallow, her pulse pounding in her ears. She couldn't make out the words, but there was a familiarity to the voice she recognized as Trent's. The other voices, though, were alien to her. Cold. Commanding. She didn't need to hear the conversation to know that this wasn't some backroom deal. This was the heart of a criminal syndicate. And Trent, the man who had so easily gotten away with murder in Oakridge, was its key player. Her hand shook slightly as she reached into her jacket pocket, pulling out her phone. She could feel the weight of the decision bearing down on her. Should she call for backup now? But she knew that if she made that call, it might be too late. There was too much at risk, her cover, her mission. The entire town of Oakridge was teetering on the brink of collapse, and if she didn't act fast, it could all slip away. She needed to be inside, to see what was happening. To gather the evidence that would take down this syndicate once and for all. Without thinking, she moved again, making her way around the side of the house. The window she had been watching was on the first floor, so she ducked low and approached a door on the back side of the building. It was old, rusted, and barely hanging on its hinges. Olivia eased it open with the gentlest of pushes, the creaking sound almost deafening in the silence of the night. She winced but didn't stop. She couldn't afford to. Inside, the house smelled of mildew and decay, but Olivia barely noticed. She was too focused on what lay ahead. She crept through the dark hallways, moving with purpose, her footsteps barely audible against the creaky floors. The voices grew louder as she approached the source. She was close now. The air was thick with tension, and she could feel the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The door at the end of the hall was ajar. She could see shadows moving inside. Olivia took a deep breath, then pushed the door open just a crack. Through the narrow opening, she could make out several figures, all gathered around a table. Trent stood at the head, speaking with authority, his words clear even through the slight barrier. But what struck her the most was the man standing next to him, a man she recognized. A man from her past, someone who had been at the heart of a case she had worked years ago. Someone she thought had disappeared for good. The revelation hit her like a slap. This was no longer just about Trent. This was bigger. The syndicate they were running was part of something far more dangerous, an underground network that reached further than she could have ever imagined. And now, she was standing at the edge of a precipice, ready to fall into the unknown. As Olivia stared through the crack in the door, she knew one thing for certain: the truth was even more dangerous than she had thought. And she was about to find out just how much it was worth. Olivia's mind raced as she stood frozen in the shadows, peering through the crack in the door. She could feel the heat of the moment pressing down on her like a heavy weight. The revelation that the syndicate was more expansive, more entrenched than she had imagined, shook her to the core. The man beside Trent was a ghost from her past, a figure who had long since disappeared from the radar, a shadow that had eluded justice for years. Seeing him here, in this secretive meeting, made the hairs on the back of her neck stand on end. She had known something was off, but she never could have predicted this level of complexity. Her heart hammered in her chest, each beat reminding her of the danger she was in. If she was caught now, there would be no coming back. She knew what Trent and his associates were capable of, and they had no loyalty to anyone but themselves. Olivia had crossed a line the moment she decided to follow that SUV into the night. She was too deep now, too entangled in their world to retreat. And she had no intention of retreating. Not now. Not after everything she had seen, everything she had risked. She was this close to ending the nightmare, to exposing the truth that would bring down Trent and his entire network. But first, she had to survive. The conversation inside the room continued, and Olivia could hear the weight of their words. They were discussing something about a shipment, a massive shipment that was supposed to arrive in Oakridge soon. It wasn't just drugs or weapons, as she initially assumed. No, this was much worse. The men around the table spoke in code, but Olivia's training allowed her to piece together the fragments. They were talking about human trafficking. The words hit her like a slap, her stomach turning in disbelief. The town she had called home, a town that had always seemed so safe, was about to become a hub for one of the most insidious criminal operations she had ever encountered. And Trent, the man she had been tracking for weeks, was at the heart of it. As the pieces of the puzzle clicked into place, Olivia's mind began to spin. This wasn't just about catching a corrupt cop, it was about stopping a human trafficking ring that spanned beyond Oakridge. Trent wasn't just running a small-time operation. He was the key player in something much larger, something that could affect countless lives if she didn't act now. But she had no idea how far this rabbit hole went. How many people were involved? How many lives had already been destroyed? Olivia stepped back, slowly, her body moving instinctively to avoid making a sound. She needed to think, to process what she had just heard. She had to stay calm, had to plan her next move carefully. She couldn't afford to be rash. The situation had escalated far beyond anything she had ever encountered. The stakes had never been higher, and the danger had never been more real. Perceptible in the still air. Olivia's heart skipped a beat. She didn't need to look at the screen to know who it was. Agent Lawson's name flashed across the display, and she answered quickly, trying to mask the panic rising in her throat. Olivia? Lawson's voice came through the speaker, low and urgent. You need to get out of there. Now. I can't, she whispered, glancing over her shoulder to make sure she wasn't being followed. I'm too close. I know what they're planning. It's bigger than I thought. Listen to me, Lawson said, his tone more insistent. Trent's network, this thing, it's not just local anymore. We've been tracking it for months. He's got connections far beyond Oakridge. You're in the middle of something we've been working to take down. You need to get out and wait for backup. We'll take it from here. I can't, Olivia repeated, her voice tighter now. I'm the only one who can stop this. I'm not leaving. Lawson's sigh crackled over the phone, but Olivia could hear the edge in his voice. You don't understand. If you stay, you're putting yourself in even greater danger. You don't know what you're up against. This isn't just about Trent anymore. What do you mean? Olivia's stomach dropped. She felt the walls close in around her as the full weight of the situation began to hit her. There's more to this than we've uncovered. Trent's not just working with local criminals. He's part of a larger operation, bigger players, international networks. You're not just in danger from him. There are people who won't hesitate to eliminate anyone in their way. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. For the first time, she realized just how far this web of corruption stretched. She wasn't dealing with a rogue cop anymore. She was up against an entire network of powerful, ruthless individuals. And they would stop at nothing to protect their operation. I can't back down, she said, determination hardening in her voice. I'm already in this deep. I'm going to finish it. Lawson paused for a long moment before responding, his voice softer now, but still filled with an underlying warning. I hope you know what you're doing. But if you're going to keep going, be careful. You're not alone in this. We're behind you, but you've got to be smart. One wrong move, and everything we've worked for could go up in flames. Olivia disconnected the call, her mind racing as she glanced once more at the farmhouse. The light from inside had dimmed, and she could hear the sound of footsteps approaching. The meeting was over. But that didn't mean she could relax. In fact, it meant just the opposite. The men inside the farmhouse weren't leaving, not for a while. She had to act before they dispersed, before they became more aware of her presence. With her heart in her throat, Olivia quickly moved around the back of the house and made her way toward a small barn behind the farmhouse. Her thoughts raced as she formulated a plan. She could hear the crunch of gravel beneath her boots, each step seemingly louder than the last. She had no choice now but to get the evidence she needed. She couldn't trust anyone else to do it for her. Inside the barn, she found what she was looking for: old crates, discarded equipment, and a small desk covered in maps and papers. As she began rifling through the documents, her hands trembled. There it was, proof. Detailed schedules of shipments, names of key players, and connections that reached all the way to the highest levels of government. Olivia's pulse quickened as she scanned the information. This was everything. This was the nail in their coffin. But she had to get it out, had to get it back to the authorities before it was too late. Suddenly, a door creaked behind her, and Olivia froze. She turned just as a shadow moved across the threshold. The last thing she saw before everything went black was the glint of metal in the dim light. The sound of the barn door slamming shut echoed in her ears. She was trapped. And there was no telling who had just walked in. The danger had never been greater, and now, she realized, she was no longer just fighting for the truth. She was fighting for her life. Olivia's head spun as the cold, metallic taste of fear flooded her senses. She hadn't even heard the footsteps approaching, too focused on the documents in her hand. The shadow in the doorway, tall and imposing, froze her in place. Her heart pounded as she realized she had made the most dangerous mistake of her career. In her single-minded pursuit of the truth, she had underestimated how far Trent and his network would go to protect their empire. The door slammed shut with a resounding crack, the sound reverberating through the barn and filling the air with an oppressive silence. For a moment, Olivia was paralyzed. The man who had just entered was one of Trent's goons. She recognized him immediately. His face was one she had seen in surveillance footage, one of the men who had been seen coming and going from the farmhouse on more than one occasion. His eyes locked on hers, narrowing with suspicion, but there was no time to process whether he recognized her. The next few seconds felt like hours as Olivia's mind raced through every possible escape plan, every countermeasure she had ever learned. But in that moment, she realized she was cornered. She couldn't outrun him. She couldn't fight him. Not in the state she was in, not with the evidence in her hands that was so crucial to the operation. "Who are you?" the man asked, his voice gruff and tinged with suspicion. His hand was already on the gun holstered at his side. The tension in the air was palpable, like the calm before a storm. Olivia knew she had only a split second to make a decision that could determine her fate. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. She couldn't show fear. She had to stay in control, just like she had been trained. The documents in her hand, the key to everything, had to make it out of this barn. If she didn't find a way out of this, everything she had risked would be in vain. Her mission, her life, it all came down to this moment. "I'm not here for trouble," Olivia said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline pumping through her veins. She forced a smile, but it felt fake, even to her own ears. "Just looking for something, a lost item. I didn't mean to intrude." The man didn't buy it. His expression darkened, and in one swift motion, he reached for the gun. The gleam of the barrel in the dim light sent a shock of fear down Olivia's spine. But she didn't move. Not yet. She couldn't make him think she was a threat. Not unless she absolutely had to. "You don't belong here," the man growled. "You're not one of us." Her heart raced, and her mind screamed at her to do something, anything. She couldn't let him get any closer, couldn't let him take the evidence from her. She needed time. But time was running out. "I'm just a lost traveler," Olivia said quickly, trying to keep her voice calm. "I thought I was on the right road, but I must have taken a wrong turn. I saw the barn and figured I'd ask for directions." The man eyed her suspiciously, his gaze scanning her from head to toe. Olivia held her breath, knowing the slightest movement could give her away. He took a step forward, but she didn't flinch. She had learned long ago to keep her body still in moments of crisis, to give nothing away. For a few seconds, the world seemed to stop. The sound of her heartbeat, her shallow breaths, the creaking of the barn, all of it filled her ears as the man looked her over. "Where are you from?" he asked, his voice low, but his grip tightening on the gun. "Oakridge," Olivia said, her mind moving quickly. She needed him to believe her, needed him to think she was just some lost civilian. She had to buy herself a few more seconds, give herself a chance to act. "I live just outside of town. Please, I don't want any trouble." There was a long pause, and for a moment, Olivia thought she had convinced him. But the man's eyes flicked to the papers in her hand, and Olivia's breath caught in her throat. She had to move. Now. Before she could react, he lunged forward, grabbing the documents from her hands with an almost predatory speed. Olivia's heart stopped as he held the papers up to his face, scanning them with a furrowed brow. The realization hit her like a punch to the gut, she had just given him everything. Everything she had fought for, everything she had risked. She was about to lose it all. The man's eyes widened as he flipped through the pages. His expression shifted from curiosity to recognition. Olivia knew that look. It was the look of a man who had just found something dangerous, something he wasn't supposed to know about. He glanced back at her, a slow, knowing grin spreading across his face. He knew. He knew exactly what she had found. Before he could say anything, Olivia sprang into action. With a surge of adrenaline, she kicked out, catching him off guard. He stumbled backward, and the papers flew from his hands, scattering across the barn floor. Olivia's pulse thundered in her ears as she dove for the documents. The man recovered quickly, lunging for her, but she was faster. She grabbed the papers, clutched them to her chest, and rolled away from his reach. She didn't think, didn't wait for another moment. She jumped to her feet and bolted for the door, adrenaline and fear coursing through her veins. She had to get out. She couldn't stay here any longer. She didn't know how many more of Trent's men were nearby, but she couldn't risk being captured. Not when the truth was within her grasp. The man cursed behind her, but she didn't stop. She was already outside, running toward the trees that lined the edge of the property. Her breath was ragged, her legs burning with effort, but she couldn't slow down. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to keep moving. A shot rang out, echoing through the night. The bullet whizzed past her, missing by inches. She didn't dare look back. She couldn't afford to. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she pushed forward, her body moving on pure instinct. She couldn't let them catch her, couldn't let them stop her. She heard another shot, but this time it was followed by a loud, agonized shout. She didn't know what had happened, but it was enough to make her push harder. Her feet were starting to slip on the wet ground, but she didn't care. She had to get to safety. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Olivia reached the edge of the woods. She could hear the sound of footsteps behind her, but she didn't stop. She was close now. Just a few more feet, and she'd be in the clearing where her car was parked. The sound of pursuit grew fainter, and Olivia risked a glance over her shoulder. She saw the man who had chased her stumbling out of the barn, but he was too far behind. She reached her car, her hands trembling as she fumbled for the keys. She threw open the door, jumped inside, and slammed it shut. Her breath came in short gasps as she started the engine, the roar of the car's motor filling the air. She didn't look back. Not until she was a mile down the road, her heart still racing. The drive back to Oakridge was a blur. The world outside the car seemed distant, unreal. She was still processing what had just happened, the way everything had come crashing down, the way her life had just changed forever. She had escaped, but she knew the danger wasn't over. It had only just begun. Trent would come after her. His network would hunt her down. But she couldn't stop now. The truth was out there, and she was the only one who could expose it. Olivia drove through the night, the papers clutched tightly in her hand, a silent vow forming in her heart. This wasn't just about Oakridge anymore. This wasn't just about bringing down Trent. This was about something much bigger, about taking down a syndicate that spanned continents, a web of corruption and violence that had torn apart countless lives. And she wasn't going to stop until she had them all.